All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Strub, and I'm the Vice President of Communications for Infrastructure Resources. I'd like to welcome you to a special session of our Excavation Safety Alliance Town Halls. For the first time, we're continuing a conversation from earlier this year. How do you track the true total cost of a damage, not just the repair costs? Our ESA Town Halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. If you have a question during the town hall, please type it into the chat box or click the raise hand icon, give us a few seconds, and we'll give you permission to unmute yourself. Once you have permission, simply click on the microphone icon at the top right corner of your screen. Today's meeting is meant to be a discussion, and you're all encouraged to ask questions and share solutions, but please try to keep your comments brief to allow others time to interact. A recording of this town hall will be posted on the ESA website, along with a brief blog post and our chat log. If you comment through chat and you do not want your comment or name included, please note that with your post. Today's session will be concluding at 11:30 Central Time. And as you can see, we have a very full panel to ensure all viewpoints are represented. So I'm going to kick off our discussion with our panelists giving a brief introduction prior to joining the conversation and giving their response. I will start with my first question to Jim Prozac. Jim, during our last conversation, a question from the audience spoke to the economic loss doctrine. Could you give a high-level explanation of what it is and how it impacts excavators?
Yeah, the economic loss doctrine is kind of a convoluted legal doctrine, so I won't go into all that. But at a high level, it's simply, in general, in a tort situation, which would be what you have in a damage situation most of the time, you can't recover damages for yourself, for your company, unless you have either a personal injury or a damage to your equipment. So the area where I think that arises most often is in the situation of delayed damages. Unless there was damage to your own equipment, for example, you hit a gas line and it damaged your equipment, or a personal injury, you're not going to be able to recover damages. Now, this is on a state-by-state basis, and various states have adopted this rule, others have not. So you just need to talk to an attorney in your state to determine what it is. The other place you want to look, and this is becoming more and more prevalent, is in the state one-call laws. Many state one-call laws specifically provide that for either operators or excavators, if the operator fails to discharge a duty under the one-call law, then it provides that a excavator can recover damages and vice versa. And there are several states that specifically allow in the law an excavator to recover delayed damages. So again, that's something that's on a state-by-state basis. So you need to check your one-call laws in your state to see if you'd be entitled to recover something like delayed damages, even though you don't suffer damage to your equipment or a personal injury.
Thank you very much for that. The next question that came in, and this is from the chat from our previous conversation, we didn't have a chance to get to it, but Andrea, if you would be willing to take this first, are indirect costs such as loss of trust and damage to representation estimated and tracked similar to your direct costs incorporated into your decision making?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So basically for our company, we are looking at the data that encompasses some of those different things. I think that's the first step before you look at the cost, is really trying to get it to that data and seeing what's impacting. So you're looking at your child cases, you're looking at all of your high impact damages, and really taking a closer look and seeing what is being more impactful to some of those scenarios. And then we're really starting to kind of almost branch out and take a look at, I would call them almost like the sub case of that, or the sub cost of that, to see if we can start kind of putting the numbers for our customer credits or the loss of trust, like you mentioned, and our reputation, because obviously if there are high impacting damages that are affecting our child cases, which are affecting our customers, then like 9 times out of 10, they're either going to ask for a credit or they're going to, maybe potentially think about going somewhere else. So yes, we are starting to look at those I think way more than we did have in the past, because those are starting to have the data's better now to be able to look at those types of things.
Dane, would you like to answer the same question about the indirect costs? Oh, if you could go off of mute at this point.
All right, I'll put my dollar in the jar. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone, for having us. There really are. So this is how we look at it. Every time there's a damage to one of our assets, our vehicles, our PG&E blue trucks roll up to that site. And the public who's driving by or in the neighborhood, they see our blue trucks. They don't know that a third-party contractor or a second-party contractor has damaged that asset. So of course, PG&E is at fault. Why is my power out? Why don't I have gas? PG&E is at fault for this. So it's really important that when we do show up at any of these damages, that we're on our best behavior, that we make sure that we're communicating effectively with our customers, with those who are present. So we often send on the larger damages a customer service representative who will literally knock on the doors, kind of inform those people who live in that neighborhood who may be affected, what's going on, what happened, and how soon they can expect it. So we're very cognizant of the impact to our company, to our reputation, and to our customers. And so I think it's important that we maintain that level of trust with our customers, that they're rapidly informed. You can sign up for text messaging if you lose your electricity or gas. You can be part of an alert system. We make sure that our website is easy to search if you have an outage or you want to report an outage. You can do it from your phone or from your computer. So we try to make as many different avenues because we're so cognizant of that.
That's great. Another question that came up, and Jim Onspach, I'll direct this initially to you. Nick, you may have something to add, but Sue has entered into the conversation as the best solution during the planning and design phase. Can you speak to how companies can justify spending on preemptive measures?
As I was saying, the first opportunity to prevent damage is when we create a new record of where we put a utility. So we have that new standard 7522 as part of the subsurface utility engineering process to give guidance on a standardized way for that to happen. But during the execution of a project of significant size, one where a civil engineer might be involved, we have this standard 3822. It's been around now for 30 years. And what it says is this is how you investigate for the presence of utilities, whether the records are good, whether there's information on it, whether it's abandoned or unknown. This is how the engineers can get the information early and design their project to avoid conflicts with utilities, which helps prevent that damage. Now, there's a cost to that. And that cost is about 1% of the project value on average, at least for transportation type road projects. However, there's a return on investment, all the studies show, of at least $3 to $7, sometimes up to $20 for every $1 spent in that investigation. And I will say it's a cost that is borne by the project, not the utility owner or the contractor. So in order to prevent damage, if it doesn't happen, it's been very difficult to quantify what doesn't happen with a cost. But we're able to do it with project metrics. So that's how the subsurface utility engineering process fits into damage prevention and its return on investment.
That's great.
Nick, do you have anything to add, Nick?
And Nick, you are still on mute if you would have something to share.
I would add that in the last 30 plus years, we've got what was a niche survey in respect to civil engineering, which is hundreds of years old and practicing. And we've got the standard that Jim references that this has grown beyond just transportation. It's achieved reaches into the public sectors of port authorities, rail, transit, all related to transportation. But we've even seen our utility clients that recognize the value in this process during planning and design. And so we're seeing a broad spectrum of different types of clients within the industry. And one important thing that I'll add is that the concept of the 811 dial before you dig has been a process that's added value to construction. Where we see the SUE playing a role is in the most important part, the planning and design. A design that has insufficient utility information is a bad way to start a construction project. So by using the SUE per the standard, we find that those projects that have had SUE applied to the project, constructions go smoothly, relatively on schedule, and that to me is a big difference. I don't take away anything from what the one call profession does. They do it well within the laws that allow tolerances to be given for their marking. But we realized in this profession, if you're going to build something, construct something, excavate something, you need some accurate information, and that's what the SUE process does when you follow the standard.
Thank you very much for that. Brenda, I know that this is something that you're passionate about. Did you have anything that you'd like to add? If you do, you are still on mute.
Yeah, I just want to, go about starting out this came about for me, basically because the contractors, I was the executive director for NUCA, Pennsylvania for 26 years before I retired recently. And we were seeing increasing mismarked and no marks. It was just going crazy, and the contractors were like, we need downtime, we need downtime, we need downtime. And finally, I came to the realization that, what's the real root cause of all of this? And started to look into subsurface utility engineering. That one of my contractors, when I first started with the association, gave me the Purdue study, which I'm sure Jim and Nick could speak to, but they gave me the SUE study from Purdue University. And he told me to put that in my file and hold it. About 20 years, we'll be ready for this. He wasn't too far away. It was about 22 years, but in 2006 here in Pennsylvania, we were able to, NUCA, Pennsylvania, worked with the Pennsylvania One Call system pretty closely on this. We were able to add SUE language to our law. Now, it took us 14 years to this day to get that message out to the designers and the project owners, but we are really starting to make some real headway. I think that really started to make a really big push here in Pennsylvania when we got enforcement. So I think you're going to see that, and I'm going to take this analogy from somebody else, but they said we can put a man on the moon, but we can't find the utilities that we have underground here on our own earth. So, the technology's here. We just need to start applying it, because in my opinion, we can't keep doing the same thing we've been doing over and over, keep tweaking the law here and there. I'm always tweaking it every 10 years here in Pennsylvania with the one call system, folks. You just can't keep doing the same thing over and over, expect different results. It's time that we start bringing technology into our industry overall, and as-built will be much better as well. So I'll let somebody else speak from there, but that's basically my message at this point.
I know we have some representatives from Pennsylvania One Call that are joining us today for the town hall. So if they have something that they would like to add about the process of updating their law and how they went through the changes, please raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted so that we can continue that portion of the conversation, and other One Calls can learn the process that you went through to make that happen. Until we get to that point, if we do, Dane, another question that came in from our earlier was tracking the true cost of damage with a damage prevention program would help some of the true cost, wouldn't it? How do you segment out the different areas that work together when a damage has taken place?
So for PG&E, we use SAP and we create an order. So it's a damage claims order, and it automatically will incorporate anyone that charges anything to that order. So that allows us to look at how many hours were for labor hours, what materials, and if we brought in any contractors, some traffic control, any of the various components that will come in to assist in restoring that service are all tracked on a single order. That allows the damage recovery team to review that order in one place, look at all of the different areas, and then they do the QC check, and then they publish the claim. So that's really a very efficient system. We also are permitted under Public Utilities Code to recover for all of our expenses. So when our asset is damaged and someone else is liable for those damages, instead of passing that on to the ratepayers, we're permitted to seek recovery from the damaging party. So that includes our investigative time. So we track all of those costs together to produce a claim that we file against the responsible party. And that includes those contractors who are working for us.
Thank you very much. Levi, I noticed that Ellen Kiger with Pennsylvania 811 had raised her hand. If you would please unmute Ellen so she can speak.
Yes, Ellen, you have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that you asked the question about the legislative process, and everybody knows that that's never a fun thing to go through, but we succeeded in Pennsylvania because of the partnerships that we have with people like Brenda and Jim and Nick. Our facility owners and our excavators all got together, and we tried to understand how the SUE process works, built it into our law, built the tools to make that work electronically for our constituents. And anybody trying to get this into their law, I would certainly encourage them to do so, but it does take some time, and it does take the help of experts. I hope that answered your question, Karen.
Thank you very much. It does. And Brenda, it looks like you might have something more to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with regard to what Dane was saying about, the looking at all the expenses and so forth. One of the things that I have found is recently in the last several years also for the contractor side is the increase in the number of what I call frivolous lawsuits, when the contractors complied with the one called law and it was a mismarked line and he still gets a lawsuit handed to him that he has to deal with, and they're getting more and more and more every day. So that's an issue for the contractors on the cost for them that's increasing. And we think that SUE again will help to reduce those frivolous lawsuits. But we need your lawyers to be aware that if the contractor is not at fault, why are you filing a lawsuit? Let's move on, because that is costing the public. Is when that gets settled, either through the insurance company or whatever, that gets passed on to every person here that buys an insurance policy. It gets passed on to the next community in some way, shape, or form. So those are things that we need to start looking at, and how can we reduce those?
Nick, if you want to share your comments, and then Dane, I'll come to you with the question from Kemp Garcia that's in the chat.
Sure. I just wanted to add that in addition to what Ellen said about the PA1 call, a lot of progress has been made thanks to Pennsylvania's effort. And one thing of note that when we were reviewing there was a user's guide task force just for looking at the SUE component within the guide, as well as looking at the rule. One thing I found very positive is that as we as a task force group were looking at the user's guide, looking at the law, the leadership of 811 PA came back and said, hey, help us improve the language in the user guide that is more, and I'll use the word prescriptive, to define the difference between a design ticket and SUE. And we did that. And it had collective reviews from Jim, myself, Brenda, the task force group. And now the 811 leadership has taken that and taken our recommendations. And I think we're at a point that we've got a final user's guide that will be the guide that guides the project owner, the utility owner, on how SUE shall be applied, and defining the difference between a design ticket and using the various quality levels that are appropriate for the type of project that may be going on.
Thank you. And so now, Dane, the question that was asked by Kemp Garcia is, can excavators bill PG&E for their downtime when costs when lines are not located properly or are late located?
Yes, we have a law claims process. You can file a claim online. You have to have supporting documentation. We review that claim and we make sure that we have, we want to maintain those positive relationships with our contractor community. And if we fail to meet our obligation, we want to ensure that we make them whole. We recognize that that's a burden to them and to their crews, that they have to stop the work, that they're not able to continue, and they have to typically evacuate from the area in order to be safe. And that really impacts the bottom line. So we feel it's important to maintain those relationships with our contractor community when we fail to meet our obligation under the law.
Two comments that are coming in. The first is, shouldn't facility owners be responsible for knowing where their assets have been placed? And then beyond that, how do we account for the costs associated with facility owner claims sent to excavators simply because a damage was identified in a location where the excavator once had a dig ticket? CGA says roughly half of damages occur because nobody called in a ticket. We're blaming the excavator who followed the law, and he's guilty until proven innocent. So I guess, Mark, that may be a question for you on the investigation side. If you would unmute, if you're, thank you.
Sure. So it seems like once in a while we hear a horror story of something like this. I would just like to say we follow the evidence. Not every damage is readily acknowledged or known by the excavator. Usually when a gas line or electric line is hit, or water line is hit, the excavating party knows that happened. And yet there are times in telecommunications when that's not the case, when they hit what's called dark fiber. And so they don't necessarily know that they hit the fiber or the line. Sometimes it takes days or weeks to identify that damage happened. And our clients aren't always in a position to be out there doing an investigation during the time the excavation takes place. So as we see thousands of these each week, I can honestly say that we follow the evidence and we have intelligent conversations as people of integrity with people of integrity. And we just follow the evidence and let that direct us. And I would like to make just a brief comment. I heard the word frivolous used earlier, and I just want to be careful about that. We do follow the evidence, and we encourage NUCA members to, when they run into a damage claim, to do a good investigation and collect the evidence for themselves so that they can present that. We probably receive $1 million a month in payments from locating companies on damages that locating companies cause. All of our clients readily and willingly pursue claims against their third-party locating companies. We would never blindly look away from a locating company's responsibility and pursue another party. We just wouldn't do that. That's the best way to put ourselves out of business, is to create frivolous lawsuits, and the liability that creates for us and our clients are just much more careful and concerned about their brand name than to do that. But as far as like this investigation down the road, oftentimes what we find is that the party that did do the damage just simply wasn't aware of it. Of course, we can't always prove a damage, and so there are plenty of times when claims are written off. I truly wish contractors would see the volume of claims that are written off, because liability couldn't be proved.
Nick, did you have something that you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, Mark makes a very good point with regards to the investigation claim documentation process. And one of the things that I found from experience that's critical. In fact, it's critical not to start at the claim itself or the damage itself, but actually start at the pre-bid documentation that you receive on a project. And I had one session I did in Texas for NUCA at their or Naples or National Convention, said that I think we have a process that we use in the SUE industry when we look at RFPs and the scope of services and any supporting documentation to determine has there ever been SUE applied in the planning of that project? And we ask that question, because the engineer of record should be able to answer that question with a simple yes or no. And if they answer that question in a no, that starts your process of documenting that there was some form of a decision made not to include SUE in that project design. Then when a claim does actually take place in the field, you've got a trail of information you receive from the engineer of record, the project owner, that helps you start to set a pattern of, okay, a best practice or a standard of care wasn't applied. And so it's something I think Ken marks on a good point, and that just should be part of the documentation. Look at the RFP and the design bid package.
I think that's great feedback. Raymond had commented that the excavator is always the last defense to a utility damage, and that brings up a conversation that we had a little bit on our last time, but speaking to training. And so Dane, would you speak to the training programs that PG&E specifically has in place?
Yes, thank you, Karen. So we have built a city out in a town called Winters, California, where we put all our employees through a training program where they get hands-on training. So it's just like going into a residential area if they're going to do locating or upgrading a service or replacing a service or maintaining a service. So the full spectrum of gas and electric on repairs, maintenance, replacements, locating, the full gamut. And then once an employee comes out and goes out into the field, we have ongoing training. So for our locators, we have an internal on Teams, much like we're on Teams today. We have a Teams page where locators from the field can view a video on a particularly challenging locate. Let's say they've encountered an insert and a dead end, and they're really getting some crazy signals. We have a video specifically walks them through that process. And most of the videos are 5 to 10 minutes. It refers to our policies, procedures, but literally gives them that visual cue to remember how to respond to this given challenge that they're facing. Every Wednesday, I host a call with all of our at-fault events, and we look for those lessons learned, and then we share those lessons through all the located marked teams through tailboards. So we send that out once a week, a tailboard. At once a quarter, we take all those events and we look at them, and is there a gap in our training that we need to fill? And we'll develop training to address that gap. And we've managed over the last 5 years to see our damages drop by almost 50% by looking at this entire end-to-end process.
That's outstanding. I think being able to have everyone communicate together is one of the things that we're all striving for. It's just a matter of how we get there to have that open communication. I know that there are also some industry training programs. Brenda, would you speak to the NUCA STAR program?
Sure. Sure. NUCA STAR came out with this, I think, about a year and a half, maybe now ago. It's basically a safety training, awareness, and recognition. And it was basically developed to help the contractor evaluate, update, and recognize their company's safety program and their practices. And then they apply for the recognition of, a platinum, gold, silver, bronze level, and they are assigned points to get to those different levels. And the goal is to, improve if you're at the bronze at the bottom level and, work your way up on a year-to-year basis and to improve that. And then, of course, NUCA also has some other project management trainers training that they're doing. I know NUCA Washington has a Dig Safe program, which I've seen several times, and Pennsylvania, we're trying to imitate that same type of training that will be available, to the contractors that are members, and non-members would also be able to pay an additional fee for that. So those are the types of safety programs that we're trying to develop, specific the Dig Safe one that Washington NUCA chapter has is more specific to the one call law, where the STAR program is all your safety, OSHA and you know, everything, but that's the basics.
Thank you very much. I know that we have Brooke with the CGA and DPI on the call as well. Brooke, you should be able to unmute yourself. Levi, if you can make sure that she can.
Do you know which name she's joined under?
Yes, Brooke, and I'm going to say her last name wrong, Dane. Kanapaki?
One moment.
While we're waiting for
you'll be able
Brooke.
to unmute yourself now, Brooke.
Perfect. While we're waiting for Brooke to join, Gold Shovel, many of you might have heard of Gold Shovel. Gold Shovel was acquired by CGA January of this year, and CGA has stood up the Damage Prevention Institute, which is really looking at partnering with contractors, owner-operators on how to create, maintain safe excavation practices and how to share those lessons learned amongst the broader team so that we can all come together on a regular basis and really understand. It also gives owner operators the opportunity to look at how other contractors are doing when we look at total damages, so we can compare apples to apples. And I think the DPI is really the next evolution from Gold Shovel. And I'm looking forward to our continued partnership with CGA.
I believe, Karen, I believe Nick might have an update on that. Nick, is that not part of the group that you're going to be working with?
I think it is. The CGA is also has been and has supported the subsurface utility engineering and the American ASC standard. So now they've got a task group that is looking at best practices, and they've included us to be, as the industry, SUE industry, to offer input on that. So I'm going to be the co-chair regarding that aspect on the CGA task force. So positive, and I think it's good because, you know, the DIRT report's a very valuable report from the locating industry perspective. But I've always, like I told Sarah, the CEO, I said, you got another damage prevention practice, which is SUE. And I think we've got to start reporting the findings there, both positive and negative. And so they're taking that look, and it's a positive move, positive step.
That's good. Brooke, were you able to unmute? At this point, Brooke, if you would raise your hand when you're able to unmute. I know Levi has changed the controls, and so we will go to our next chat. When you raise your hand, I'll open it up and we'll go back to learning more about DPI. A question coming in from the chat is, when a facility owner blames a damage on an excavator, to research his work history to determine if he was even working where the damage occurred is accounted nowhere. It's overhead every excavator has to eat. If they're falsely accused, can they recover their costs from the accusing facility owner? Jim Prozac, would you be able to speak to that of the cost recovery?
Yes, it's very difficult in a situation to show that a lawsuit is completely baseless. If you are able to show that a lawsuit is completely baseless, then there is a chance that you can recover. The other thing you need to look at, again, it's on a state-by-state basis. I practiced for 40 years in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma, for example, has a statute outside of its one call statutes that provides that in a lawsuit involving property damage, that the prevailing party is entitled to recover attorney's fees. So you need to look for something like that. And again, the general rule in the United States is what they call the American rule, where each party is responsible for its own attorney's fees. So if an operator sues an excavator, one of the things that it typically cannot recover is the attorney's fees that it incurs in the lawsuit. Then the same is true for the operator for the excavator for defending a lawsuit. And going back to one of the questions that Mark Seaton commented on earlier, as an attorney who represents a number of utility clients and contractors both, we counsel our utility clients, if you've got a bad case, don't file it, because all that does is impede the entire process, because the way to stop damage is communication. And if an excavator knows he's going to get sued no matter what happens, you're not going to have that communication. So we counsel our clients, unless, as Mark said, the evidence supports it, don't file it. Just from a personal perspective as an attorney, I don't like to look bad. So I tell my clients, don't put me in a position where I'm going to look like a fool.
Another question that we had come in, and I don't know if this is, oh, Mark, what would you like to add on that? I'm sorry.
Well, I think the question is a valid one that was asked, and the solution isn't just simply to add costs, because then one side will add costs and then the other side will add costs and then another side will add costs. The solution is cooperation and communication. If we improve communication, we don't have to talk about the idea of attorneys and litigation. I really believe that communication, Jim Prozek had mentioned that communication is the key. And because I don't think that there's a client that I represent that wants or is eager to look at litigation. So.
This would be probably for Mark or Jim. The question, how far back can you bill a damage? Can you go back to the time of damage or the time of discovery, and does it vary state to state?
Well, I'll go ahead and start on that. Each state has what they call a statute of limitations, and that can vary from Louisiana, which has a 1-year statute of limitations. And what that means is you have to file your claim within 1 year after the damage occurred. And I've seen states with statutes of limitations as long as 6 years. So earlier we had a little bit of discussion about damage investigation and documenting a damage. If you're aware of a damage, you want to make sure you document that, because if somebody waits 6 years to bring that claim, many people involved in that claim are going to be gone. In fact, I had one that happened like that where I was actually defending the company, and 2 of the people that were involved in the initial incident had heart attacks and died. So it was difficult to recover any information, and that makes it very difficult to defend.
Yeah, so like Jim said, it starts on the date of damage. It doesn't start when the damage is discovered. Usually there are a few states that recognize that a statute or a different statute may apply for hidden or undisclosed damages, but for the most part, it starts on the day the damage happened, not on the day it was discovered, and it's different in each state. And some states, a couple of states have different statutes for motor vehicle or above ground facility damages caused by a moving vehicle as compared to excavation related damages.
Dane?
Yeah, so first I'll answer this 2 parts. We have a statute of limitations of 3 years in California for most damages, and 6 months if it's from a municipality or city or state government caused the damage. We have 6 months to file that claim. So the statute is shorter. But one of the things that we recognized is employees don't always tell their bosses that they damaged something. And so the first time the boss hears about it is when the claim file shows up in their in basket. And it takes a while to put together a claim. So we put together a process to give them a notice within 10 days when we've identified someone who's going to get a claim, that there may be a claim coming. So we send that to the property owner, the contractor's team, so that they're aware, hey, this is coming, this is something we're looking into, and you may get a claim. It doesn't mean that there will be, and then we have a contact location for them to reach out if they have any further questions.
Thank you very much. Andrea, you had something you'd like to share?
I was just going to agree with Dane. I think that's a very wise policy to use from an industry standard. In this type of work, the more communication you can have between an excavator, utility operator, and a locate company, and put those individuals on notice and have those communications and work hand in hand with, investigations, at the end of the day, you're gonna get better results from it. So I think that's a good opportunity for anyone that's not doing it to do. And then currently, that's something that we do within our company. So it's been pretty successful throughout the years.
That's great. Brooke is unable to join us over the audio, but I appreciate that she put her information into the chat. That'll be captured both in the blog and on our website. But so she is open and welcoming conversations about how DPI is working to develop a rich data set on damages, but also implementation of best practices to target future training. So she included a link where some basic information on DPI or the Damage Prevention Institute may be found. I would encourage everybody to visit that. I know that DPI was a topic that was just discussed at the NUGA annual meeting from their education committee. And so I think that it's as a new initiative, I think it's something that everybody should be looking into and learning more about. So thank you, Brooke, for being willing to share your information. Another question that we have coming in is, what we have is boring companies that bore on top of our water mains. Their equipment scratches the water line enough that in years down the road, it finally breaks along those lines. And also sewer lines get bored through and does not get found until things back up. So for our panelists, if you'd be willing to raise your hand to speak about that, for some of the smaller damages that can come that may not result right away, how do you go back to figure out where that initial point happened? Mark, would you be comfortable speaking to that as the investigator?
Yeah, sure. Usually in the investigation process, pictures will later reveal the directional bore going through the water line or the sewer line, and not typically a water line, but through the sewer line or through the conduit that protects it. So there's not a damage initially, but years later there's a damage because the integrity of the pipeline is impacted. And that's where there are some states that recognize a different statute of limitations for an undiscovered damage. But typically what will happen is, that will get discovered 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. I would say most of our clients end up not pursuing those claims because they believe that the statute has long expired. But we do see them. We do see them from time to time.
Okay, Brenda?
Yeah, so here in Pennsylvania, we have it in our one call law that they have to use the HDD consortium's best practices, which means they have to pothole out in front of their borehead. So they find those lines in advance. So those hydrovac excavation guys are really important here in Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of them around. I believe I saw some that were here participating today. Kudos to you guys for what you do. But you are a very valuable part. I think that would help a lot if you require that. If you have a contract and you're the project owner on that water main, you should be requiring that they use hydrovac out in front and find where their borehead's going to go. That'll help alleviate a lot of that, I think.
As
Karen,
we're
one thing to add to that, when you're talking about how do you find this, most states have laws that require their one-call agencies to retain their records for a period of time, whether that be 3 years, 5 years, or so forth. If you have a damage, your statute of limitations, as Mark said, if it's an unknown damage, most states do have what they call a discovery rule, which means you have to discover the damage, and then your statute starts to run. But the problem is when it's 3 years down the road, you don't know who was there or when it got damaged. But if you can go back and look at the one call records to see who's been excavating in that area over a period of time. That's probably, Mark, I'm sure you've seen this, but the most difficult thing to do is to figure out who was there. If you have a valid claim, you still have to find somebody.
Yeah, I'll just add to
So
it
that's
because
one way to go back and do it. All records.
someone commented earlier in the string. You can see that back if you scroll back about 10-15 minutes, that they're being punished for calling in. We should never look at it when we comply with laws. We should never, and statute, we should never look at it as being punished for that. But I get their point. Like, we did it, so you're holding us accountable because the people who actually did the damage didn't call for a locate. No, I mean, that's very pessimistic. I understand your frustration, but typically you're not going to be excavating without the property owner or public utility, landowner knowing that you're doing the work, even years back. Most of this requires intensive research that you just don't see. And oftentimes we or our clients determine that we've exhausted our efforts. We don't have enough evidence, and the claim is not pursued. Occasionally, the landowner or municipal government identifies the party that was actually doing the work. It may or may not coincide with dig tickets. And I would say when the evidence points to that specific work as causing that specific damage, that's probably what you're referring to. But I think what that individual didn't see was all the work that was done for months in advance of that to try to single that out. Again, the majority of the time, these get written off.
Jim Onsbach, you had something that you wanted to add?
I'm sorry, Karen. I was just going to say, following up on what Mark said, when I said go back and look at the dig ticket, I didn't mean automatically file a lawsuit against the person that called in the dig ticket. I've never had a claim that went to litigation without first giving the opportunity to talk to the excavator and giving the excavator the opportunity to say, yeah, I called in the ticket, but there were 4 people out there working besides me. So I'm not suggesting that you immediately sue the person that called in the dig ticket. That's the last thing I would suggest. It's just a way to go back and find out who was in the area.
Jim Onsbach, you had something that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the conversation about boring, horizontal directional drilling, perhaps. I remember one of the early magazine covers for HDD said, "Run deep, run safe." And that was the selling point of HDD, is you could get under all of the existing utilities. So we know that there are a lot of deep utilities out there. The trouble is you cannot expose those necessarily because they're too deep. And so most of the one call statutes that I see have this omission in there regarding what do you do when the depth of where you are expecting to find an existing utility and the depth of your bore are excessive and you cannot safely expose ahead of time. All the statutes, or a majority of them, are silent on that issue. And so everybody kind of just closes their eyes and ignores the problem. And I think we need to tune up some of these elephants in the room that are out there that we haven't addressed before.
Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add to that piece? There were a lot of heads nodding in agreement.
Oh, yes.
Good point. Good point. Good
So
point.
let me just say a couple of things to what Jim brought up, and I think that's a great conversation starter. Thank you, Jim. One of the challenges is, how are you going to locate that in the future? What is if you're going really deep, which is, we appreciate the goal of that, but will this asset be locatable in the future? And then for California, the statute says within conflict. So when you're digging, if I'm digging down 3 feet and the asset that I'm worried about is 5 feet, it's not in conflict. So when you're shooting your bore head, It's that assets which might be in conflict with that specific excavation. So there are, within California, there are, we have thought about that, but the challenge that I keep bumping into is with these deep assets is, are they locatable?
Karen,
Nick?
if I might chime in on that.
Yes.
I'm going to go back to communication. When you get in a situation where something is deep, you're having trouble finding it, communicate. Since I represent utility owners, I'm going to let out the dirty little secret here. If you're an excavator and you want to protect yourself, contact the utilities, ask them for help. Many will come out there and help you. If they don't, by asking for help, you've protected yourself in a situation where if you hit something, there is a claim.
I think that's very wise. And it fosters that back and forth communication that needs to happen for any improvement to take place. Nick? Oh, you're still on mute, Nick.
Yeah, to Jim and Dane's point, it's an excellent point. You know, the industry and technology is there for us to be able to require those deep borings or horizontal drilling to have the means to place facilities above attachments to that pipeline and bring it to the surface so that it is locatable. And I think we need, as the DPI, as the damage prevention industry, we should start looking at seeing that the project owners that are approving the permits make that a requirement. It's there, it can be done.
There's
And
one comment.
I would add to that in Colorado, the state has recognized that having something being locatable electronically also means a signed survey of the installation of that to a stated accuracy and precision so that you can recreate its exact location within tolerance in the future. So, you know, we don't have to have something that works on geophysics to find this or an exposure. If we know exactly where it is and somebody has put their stamp on it, we also have that ability then to try to prevent damage to it.
Jim Prozak, I have a question from you from the chat that says, so is a contractor held liable if they spot a conduit and then hit the actual line below it?
Well, I presume in that situation he's talking about, there's more than one facility in that same area.
Sounds so.
And the answer is yes, you can be. I've had many situations where somebody has seen marks, has dug down, and they found something, and they didn't bother to go any deeper. So one of the things, one of the best practices I've seen throughout the industry is when you start your project, and I heard several speakers talk about this, your protection against liability doesn't start when you do the damage. Your protection against liability starts when you start the project. When you provide a notice of excavation, you will get a list along with the response from the one call agency that has everybody to whom they've provided notice in the area. And in states with a positive response requirement, check those positive responses against the tickets you receive. In states that don't have a positive response requirement, when you go out to that area to begin your excavation, look at the notice or the ticket you receive from the one call agency. See whose names are on it. See the different utility companies that are on that ticket. If you're out there and you've got 5 utilities on there and you only see 2 sets of marks out there, find out why. Send another notice to the utility company, contact, or rather the one call agency, or contact the folks on there. And that's how you protect yourself from hitting that second line. Make sure that you do everything you can to identify whether there is in fact a separate line out there. How many sets of marks are there? If you've got 5 on the ticket and you only see 2 sets of marks, going back to the old Space Family Robinson warning, Will Rogers, danger. Look around.
There's another comment from Fred Lesage that said, rather than insist on locatability, why not require the owner to know where he put his stuff? This bleeds into a little bit of a mapping conversation that I think could be a whole subset. But Dane and Andrea, do either one of you want to speak to mapping and why some of that is not as disclosed as some people would like?
You know,
Yeah.
that's go ahead.
No, you go first. You started.
So I will say that, you know, something we're very cognizant of is abandoned facilities. And when we have a facility that we cut off at the main, the next step is to make sure that if we leave that facility in place, that we update our records to include that there was a 90-foot section of pipe that was left abandoned. And so I think it's really incumbent upon owner operators to know where their assets are located within tolerance, and that they're familiar with changes and upgrades. And records is a challenge in the bane of every owner operator. Mostly for PG&E, it's when we acquire someone else's assets. So suddenly we're responsible for what was in the ground and poorly mapped. I think of a military installation we acquired that had no records. And it really produced a challenge for us to go out there and update their facilities at our cost. And so it's one of the challenges in the industry, and those best practices that we can all share on how to get better are going to make us all benefit.
Andrea?
I would agree with what Dane has said, and then I would also add on that probably one of the biggest hurdles is companies acquiring other companies and their records not being great. And then I know with my company, there's a lot of different hands in the cookie jar trying to manage these types of records, from the GIS mapping all the way down to, you know, the individuals that are like touching this daily to the engineers. So there's a lot of different individuals that are trying to, you know, protect the network and do what they need to do. So I think what our only opportunity now is to try to make sure what is there is correct, continue to look for ways to better the process, whether it's through different technology we have today, through Earth and Utilisphere, whether it's through partnering more with the locators and having, because obviously those are the ones that can see it. If they're going out there to locate and there's an issue, there has to be a two-way communication back to the engineer or to the individual that's in that group to say, something's not right here. You know, I need somebody to go take another look at it. So we've implemented some new things within our company to try to do that, to make sure that the maps are correct, making sure that things are updated accordingly, making sure that, you know, everybody's on the same page and just taking baby steps to try to fix it. Because to Dane's point, there is no utility company I know out there that doesn't have an issue with maps. Now, we might all be at different scales of who needs to do more than others, but we all have issues with it. So it's just a work in progress right now. That is the best I can say, that we'll just have to continue to try to work at. And hopefully with the technology advances that are coming, there can be more that we can do faster to get those corrected.
Thank you. Mark, we're at time, but I noticed that you do have one more comment that you'd like to make.
I think it was very well said by Dane and Andrea. We need more locating companies, not less locating companies. We've just seen our whole industry consolidate dramatically to just a couple of locating companies. We need more quality locating companies out there and not ones who are quickly gobbled up by these. That's part of the solution too.
Thank you. There was one comment that was made, and I think it speaks to kind of the personal ownership and goes back to the training programs that we talked about, whether it be the NUCA STAR program or DPI, but it said there are systems to record tickets that retain them for at least 7 years as well. So you don't have to rely upon one call records. And I think as the excavator, having those things in-house rather than looking for somebody else to maintain and have your documentation for you is always a wise idea. So I genuinely appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts and their concerns and some potential solutions. Levi will be adding a brief survey into the chat so we can continue to improve these discussions and address topics that are important to you. And on behalf of everyone at IR, I would like to thank you for joining us. I have taken some further ideas out of here, whether it be another Sue, so Jim, you can speak more on the ASE to standards or having it be a mapping discussion. So please keep in mind that a recording of the town hall will be posted on excavationsafetyalliance.com. You'll also be able to register for future virtual town halls, and our next is April 13th, which is discussing defending utility damage claims, what the contractor or excavator needs to do to help their insurance carrier defend claims. And April is always a busy month for everyone as we celebrate National Safe Digging Month and honor the locators during ELSA, which is April 24th through 30th. So please be sure to check for free resources through ESA. To our panelists today, thank you for sharing your expertise. I genuinely appreciate you giving us an hour of your time, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.